Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome for the final day of this conference on consumer behavior and financial markets. I'm Anders Andersson.
And I am Paolo Sodini.
So today I'm going to chair the first two sessions, and I'm just gonna repeat the rules again. So it's gonna be 20 minutes for presentation, 15 minutes for discussion, and 5 minutes for questions. And we allow people to speak up, but I would like to ask you to raise your hand if you have a question in the last part. So first out will be Olga Balakina from Lund University and Aarhus. She's going to present her paper, Unshrouding Product-Specific Attributes through Financial Education. So please, Olga, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Anders. Let me share my slides. Can you see them okay? Great. So I'd like to say thank you again for accepting our paper to this conference. And let me start by presenting my co-authors, Bimal, Aditya, and Renuka. And I would like to talk about our paper with the title Unshrouding Product-Specific Attributes Through Financial Education. I think in this audience, I don't need to convince anyone that financial decision-making poses a lot of challenges for households and individuals. These challenges arise from overall low financial literacy level, from the fact that financial mistakes are persistent among individuals, and on top of it, from the fact that financial firms shroud product-specific attributes or hide some product features to extract additional profit. So let's consider an example of an insurance product, an endowment insurance product existing in India, which is actually at the core of our paper, which offers life insurance plus a saving component. So this is the brochure that a potential customer would see. The brochure explains that it's a life cover with attractive returns, explains the policy term, premium paying term, length, and below I summarize some other details that would be in the sales booklet. So, for example, a potential customer would have sum assured presented, an amount that you would get in the case of death, or if no death occurs at maturity of the product. Plus, a customer might get simple and final bonuses. So simple bonuses, in this example, 43 rupees per 1,000 rupees of sum assured every year, and the final bonus is 20 rupees for every 1,000 sum assured. So let's assume that our potential customer lacks financial literacy. What would she miss in this information, or what would she misinterpret in the information provided? So first of all, in the booklet, sum assured always is presented in nominal terms. So if our customer doesn't understand the difference between real and nominal values, she will definitely overestimate the expected return because it's presented in nominal terms. On top of it, neither bonuses are guaranteed. So they are not supposed to be considered in calculations of the expected return of from the product. But they are in the booklet, they are presented and have this attractive name bonus, which is usually drives a lot of attention from the consumer. In addition, interest rates for the bonuses are simple interest rates. And if a consumer doesn't know the difference between simple and compounding interest rate, she might overestimate the expected return. In addition, let's consider what are actually the returns that are provided by this product. So in this example, let's compare an endowment product for non-smoking male with a sum assured of 600,000 rupees with maturity 16 years, and compare this return to the return from the replicating portfolio with exactly the same price and the payment schedule which consists of insurance, has the same risk coverage as endowment product, and risk-free saving part. So on this graph, you can see that in green are the returns for term insurance plus saving, replicating portfolio. In red are returns from the endowment insurance product with bonus, and in gray are the returns for the endowment product without bonus. So if the product is priced fairly, a consumer should expect green returns. In the best case scenario, she would get red returns, and in the worst case scenario, she would get gray returns. So in the end of the day, she would get something between red and gray. And we can see that in all the cases, the gray returns are significantly lower than the green returns, and the red returns are also lower than the green returns. So the firms are shrouding the actual value of their product, the actual value being lower than the presented one. So how do we resolve this issue? So one of the potential solutions is financial education. Financial education interventions led to mixed results described in the literature. In the most recent literature review of randomized control trials, trial interventions, results are muted, and in particular in insurance field, no financial education interventions led to significant effects on insurance in insurance markets. So all the literature highlights the challenges that financial education poses. So some of these challenges are that the knowledge obtained through the education is not used in specific instances and is even more difficult to use in presence of sales agents. Education is time consuming, and on top of it, it's difficult to evaluate welfare outcomes of education. Does education improve the welfare of newly educated people? Does it, how does it affect the non-educated, people who are left non-educated? And can we actually, through education, make firms unshroud the value and present the truthful values of the financial products? So in this paper, we are trying to tackle all these challenges by proposing a new approach to financial education design. It's product-specific, delivered just in time, which consists of video that shows what to look for in an insurance product. It proposes quick, accessible rules of thumb to follow for a consumer. Through field experiment, we test the effect of this intervention on consumers' willingness to purchase the endowment insurance and term insurance, and we find that intervention leads to 3 percentage point reduction in intention to purchase endowment insurance, 5 percentage point increase in intention to purchase term insurance, and on top of it, it improves knowledge among individuals. Further on in the paper, we set up a theoretical model that helps us to evaluate the market implications of information intervention like this. So as a result, we are proposing a new criteria how to evaluate the market effect of financial education. So let me jump to the experiment. So experiment has 5 major steps. The first step is recruitment and randomization of individuals in of households in 3 groups: control, treatment 1, and treatment 2. At the second stage, we conduct the intervention. Each group receives their educational video, and after they watch the video, we conduct follow-up survey on the knowledge questions. At step 3, we give a sales pitch of an endowment insurance very closely resembling the products that you can have on the market. At the step 4, we ask the question whether respondents will purchase the endowment product just advertised to them or sold to them or not. And to follow up, at the step 5 in a week, we conduct a phone survey, which is independent of the end-line survey and conducted by different surveyors. And we ask individuals if they would like to purchase term insurance. So 3 groups, control, treatment 1, and treatment 2, all of them receive general information about insurance, why it matters, and what the products available on the market. Groups treatment 1 and treatment 2 receive additional video on rules of thumb that proposes questions that can be asked to evaluate the insurance product or insurance offered to them. Those questions include how much cover is required, what is the difference between guaranteed and non-guaranteed return, what is the real rate of return, and what are the surrender terms of the contract. And group 2, treatment 2, on top of the general information and rules of thumb, receives also an explicit product comparison, which explains the breakup between insurance component and investment component of endowment insurance product, and proposes a replicating portfolio that can be acquired. So our empirical specifications follows the standard of randomized controlled trials, where we compare the responses of the individual households in treatment 1 and treatment 2, treatment groups to control groups. And we find that our rules of thumb cause the decrease in the intention to buy endowment insurance by 3 percentage points, and increase in the intention to buy term insurance. So individuals are less inclined to buy bad product, suboptimal product, and are more inclined to buy a good product. Providing individuals with additional information, as in treatment 2, does not lead to any additional effect on decision making. Both interventions have an effect on knowledge of individuals, such as what is the insurance cover required, what is the real return, what are the important features of the insurance contract, endowment insurance contract, and what to pay attention to. And on top of it, our rules of thumb help individuals to unshroud features of the insurance contract. So our intervention, based on the criteria proposed in Kraft 2020 and reiterated in Kaiser and co-authors' literature review, has a significant effect, a medium-sized significant effect, compared to the other insurance literature with no significant effects. It is low cost and it's easy to scale. So the intervention is effective based on the criteria for educational interventions. But we want to go on, we want to move beyond that. We want to ask, what are the welfare implications of our educational intervention and interventions like ours? So does it improve the welfare of newly educated consumers? Does it spill over to individuals left behind, so left non-indicated? How does it affect the market equilibrium? So we rely on important literature in economics, for example, papers by Gabeck, Leibson, and Kostel and Sugar. And we set up a theoretical model that helps us to see that unless education leads, or information intervention leads to firms stopping unshrouding shrouding product values, consumers that are left uneducated are worse off than before the education. So education can hurt some individuals in the market. So our market that is market for product with shrouded value, where we have an endowment product, has two components, insurance and saving, and the value that's presented to consumers is higher than the actual value of the product. There are two types of consumers. Myopic consumers are unaware of actual value being lower than the presented value, and sophisticated consumers actually know about the value shrouding and then can avoid it at the cost E. Firms cannot set up any value for their product, so no outrageously high presented values. So there is an upper bound for the differential between actual and presented payouts. And in equilibria, we see that if the share of myopic consumers is larger than the threshold, firms shroud the true value, and if it's lower than the threshold, firms are forced to unshroud the true value. So the conclusion is that the greater is the share of myopic consumers, ex-ante share of myopic consumers in the market, the higher is the probability of firms shrouding the value. So what can we do? We can lower the ex-ante number of myopic consumers. How do we do it? Through educating them. So financial third-party education, which would decrease the share of myopic consumers, which would accelerate the unshrouding in the market. And the objective of the education would be to move the share of myopic consumers below the threshold, or to make enough consumers sophisticated to move the markets from shrouded equilibrium to unshrouded equilibrium. So let's consider two cases when the education is ineffective and effective. So we start, before the education, we start in shrouded equilibrium here. And myopic consumers in shrouded equilibrium are worse off than sophisticated consumers. If education is ineffective and we are still remaining in shrouded equilibrium, both myopic consumers and sophisticated consumers are worse off. And the welfare that they do not receive goes to firms. So firms actually benefit from ineffective education and keep shrouding the value. In the case of education is effective, sophisticated and myopic consumers have identical surpluses. So, and the market provides truthful values for the products. It's unshrouded equilibrium in the market. So again, for education to be, in our model for education to be effective, it should change the share of myopic consumers or increase the share of sophisticated consumers. And we evaluate, from the model, we derive the necessary bound, gamma star, necessary threshold, beyond which education is effective. This threshold depends on two parameters: the share of sophisticated individuals, ex-ante share of sophisticated individuals in the market, and the profit differential for firms in shrouded and unshrouded equilibrium. So on this graph, you can see the distribution between shrouded equilibrium and unshrouded equilibrium, depending on profit differential and ex-ante fraction of myopic consumers. And here is in the color area, we can see the effects of education required to move from shrouded equilibrium to unshrouded equilibrium. It varies quite a bit, and beyond the yellow area, here in the white area, the effect is more than 100%. It means that we require more than double increase of the number of sophisticated consumers to achieve unshrouded equilibrium in this parameter set. So let's consider an example. If we begin with 60% myopic consumers and 60% profit differential, we need 50% increase in the share of sophisticated consumers to achieve unshrouded equilibrium. Our intervention is effective, as we said before, and it leads to 8.3% increase in the share of sophisticated consumers. But it's displayed in red, the effectiveness of our intervention. So our intervention would move the market from shrouded values to unshrouded values in this set of parameters. Unfortunately, it's a narrow set of parameters. Effective financial education leads to unshrouding, but in a narrow set of parameters. So, in conclusion, I would like to summarize what we achieved in this paper. So we are proposing a product-specific financial education intervention that provides easy-to-scale, a low-cost intervention, and we show that it works. It reduces demand for suboptimal products from educated consumers. But no, and we continue with setting up and calibrating a model of a market with products with shrouded values to assess the welfare implications of our intervention and similar intervention to ours. So we show that our intervention works without making uneducated consumers worse off. So it moves the market from shrouded values to unshrouded values, but only within a narrow parameter space. So positive treatment effects, as in our case, in our treatment case, in our intervention case, are necessary, but might be not sufficient to improve the welfare outcomes in the market. Financial interventions, financial education interventions require large effects to improve the welfare outcomes in the market and unshroud the values for financial products. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Olga. That was an excellent presentation. Now, discussing this paper is Ansgar Walther from the Imperial College London. Would you share your slides, please?
Okay, can people see my slides? Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Paolo and Anders, for inviting me to discuss this paper. It's a pleasure to read. Let me just give a quick overview. Olga did an excellent job, but essentially the punchline is that people who are told rules of thumb about these insurance contracts, the endowment insurance, buy fewer of them because they're a bad deal. And more detailed information, if you give them the rules of thumb and some more detail, that has very little additional effect, which I thought was a very interesting result. It almost says that we need to push people in the right direction, but we don't need to hold their hands. We don't need to give them every last bit of information to fix the mistakes that they make. Now, these effects are put into a Gabax-Leibson style model of myopic choice with shrouding. And I think that's a great idea to put them in that model, because you learn that these effects are kind of small in the context of that model. The intervention that we see in this paper would make a difference to the kind of equilibrium that gets played only for a small parametric region. Now, it's kind of a negative result, but I think that's a feature, not a bug of this paper. I think the great thing about this paper is that it's combined the RCT with some pretty serious modeling and structural work to actually put economic meaning on the treatment effects. And I think that's an absolute selling point for this piece of work. And for that reason, I highly recommend that people read this paper. So that's sort of my takeaway from reading it. My main comment is you could think a little bit more carefully even about welfare and about what kinds of models you consider. So I like the modeling, but I want to push you a little bit further. So in particular, the paper kind of adopts a paternalist tone from the start. There's always statements like consumers don't know where to begin. They don't know what they don't know. How can we transform these poor little myopic individuals into sophisticated people? And you know, that's also reflected in your choice of model. You start with Gabax-Leibson, which assumes that people are to some extent myopic. This is okay because, as you say, there's a lot of external authority supporting this, right? There's a large literature in household finance that shows that people have biases, people are reluctant to take the right advice. And for that reason, Gabax-Leibson has struck a chord in this community. There's a model that people are using more and more to describe this sort of situation. And you know, I also believe that some of this is going on. But what would be even better in my view is to probe and extend some of these assumptions about myopia and shrouding inside the paper. And I wonder if you can do that. Okay, so just to play the devil's advocate, you could ask, do we actually have any evidence of irrationality and myopia in this data? And can we conclude from the headline results that there is a case for government intervention, even if it's a small case? So within your model, the answer is clearly yes, right? Within the parametric region you showed us, there is a case for doing the intervention because it shifts us from the shrouding equilibrium to the unshrouded equilibrium. But it's not necessarily true in a wider class of models that these kind of treatment effects justify government intervention. And I'm just going to give an example which is based on costly information choice. Again, this is very much devil's advocate. I'm not a Chicago school purist, but I think it's important to think through it. So suppose that there's a population of insurers who offer a bunch of products which have net present value from the consumer's perspective equal to X, and that's dispersed across different products. I don't know exactly which product is a good deal ex ante, so let's think of X as being a random variable from the consumer's perspective. And the consumer can learn the true X for any given product by reading the fine print or by hiring an advisor, etc. So you can learn what this product is actually offering, but that has some cost attached to it, which I call C. And that could be either the cost of time or the cost of the advisor or something like that. And once you figure out the numbers here, assuming you want to adopt the product if and only if it has positive NPV, it's optimal to learn if and only if the value of information, which is this equation down here, I call it V, is greater than 0. So this depends on the probability that NPV is negative, so then on the probability that you would use the information to reject times the expected value of X given that X is negative. Now, if that thing is positive, then it's optimal to learn for the true X. Okay, so now let's think about welfare in this model and think about running the exact experiment that you've run. Suppose that two things are true. Suppose that learning is not really worth it. Suppose the value of information is actually negative because the costs are too large. And suppose also that insurance looks good a priori. So the prior expectation of the NPV is positive. So if you had no information, I would buy it. Okay, so now suppose we run an experiment where the treatment is free advice. I give people some information for free, they don't have to pay the cost. That's the treatment group. And the control group remains uninformed and acts based on only the prior. Okay, because for them, it's not worth it to buy information. That's what I've assumed. Right, so the control group always buys the insurance based on their prior. The treatment group buys the insurance only if they learn based on the free information provided to them that X is positive. So they buy insurance less often than the control group. Right, that's consistent with the headline result in the paper. But in this model, there's absolutely no rationale for government intervention. Right? There's no reason. I've assumed that learning isn't really worth it. The cost of learning is higher than the benefits. So there's no reason for the government to step in and provide information unless they have some sort of superior technology. But in the public sector, compared to the private, but that's kind of a strong assumption. So the takeaway is really that the evidence does not in itself reject a model of rational consumers in favor of myopic consumers, right? Like I've just given an example with Bayesian consumers that is consistent with the main result. And importantly, what we can also take away is that the positive treatment effect in a world like this doesn't really justify intervention by itself. This is kind of obvious when we think about treatment effects in the case of physical goods. If I ran the RCT where we give people a free car and we see that the treatment control drives more because they've been given a free car, this doesn't necessarily mean that the government should give away cars, right? We should still be asking, what is the market failure here? And information based on the example I gave is not necessarily so different from physical goods. Okay, we want to still ask, what is the market failure? And I think that's where the distinction between myopia and costly information really matters, because if there is myopia, then it's obvious that there's a case for intervention. Then you want to fix people's irrational mistakes. If it's costly information, there's not such a clear case. And so the key question I want to pose is, can we use the data to disentangle these models? And I feel like you've already done half the work, because you've taken this RCT and you've combined it with a model. What I think would be a good thing to do, just to address this point, is just to extend the model from 2 types of consumers to 3 types, right? So you have myopic guys with probability alpha, and suppose you also have these people that I've modeled, rational but with costly information. Let's suppose they are probability beta. And then there are the fully rational, fully informed people with probability 1 minus alpha minus beta, so that's the rest. Okay, and then instead of just deriving welfare implications as a function of the myopic fraction alpha, do it in terms of both alpha and beta to figure out when do we actually want to intervene, when is this thing worth it, how much does it improve welfare, etc. I think just asking that question in the slightly more general model would strengthen things a lot. And I just want to make a few suggestions on how you could disentangle alpha and beta. So there are a few avenues you could go down. So alpha, remember, is the myopic people, beta is the costly information case that I've presented. So in my view, one of the most interesting results in the paper is this no hand-holding result, right? So to some extent, people seem to be thinking for themselves. When you give them basic rules of thumb, they think for themselves, is this a good deal or is it a bad deal, and make a better decision, right? So that, to some extent, that already rejects, in my mind, full-blown Gabex-Leibson myopia, right? Because those myopic guys, they're really quite naive, and the people in your data don't seem to be so naive. So I don't know if you can turn that into a quantitative statement, but I think that's something to keep in mind. The second way that you could get at this is to think about the fact that endowment insurance is a bad deal, as you've demonstrated, relative to other products and relative to a replicating portfolio of different products. And you could ask the question, how bad? How bad is the deal? Right? So given the observed differences in rates of return between the bad deal and the good deal, how large would costs of information have to be to generate the observed behavior? Right? It could be that you do this because the differences in the paper are quite big. And if you do this exercise, you're going to reject my model straight away, possibly, because you're going to say, well, for people to leave that much money on the table because of costly information would have to be so costly as to be implausible. Right? That would be one avenue to go down as well. And then third, it might also be worth asking, which a lot of papers do, I think, that consider information and mistakes, whether there is any heterogeneity in treatment effects, for example, by education or by income of your respondents, that is inconsistent with the costly information story. So next, there's another dimension along which you might want to go further than Gabex and Leibson, because remember, the key feature in their model, the key feature of the myopic, the alpha consumers, is that they can be tricked, right? When the firm hides the properties of its product, these guys don't have rational expectations. They come into the transaction assuming the best possible behavior by the firm, when a rational expectation consumer actually would assume the worst possible behavior by the firm. Right? So when they see something that they don't understand, they act in a slightly naive way. And so that's fine, that possibly applies to the setting, because as you say in the paper, the descriptions of endowment insurance that consumers are presented with are hard to understand. But it would be worth examining in a bit more detail whether this complexity necessarily amounts to shrouding. Because if it does, if there is some shrouding going on, then that also kind of implies that there must be some alpha consumer, there must be some myopic consumers out there, right? Because if everybody was rational, firms wouldn't bother with shrouding. But it isn't obvious that complexity equals shrouding, right? The leaflet that I get when I buy a pack of aspirin is also quite complex, and I often don't bother reading it. And it's like that because the manufacturer needs to state all the relevant facts about aspirin, while also avoiding legal liability So, you know, that's quite a hard thing to do, writing that document. So it often ends up being quite complex. So the descriptions of financial products might be complex for the same reason, right? It could be that with the best will in the world, you cannot describe a state contingent insurance contract and cover your own liability without making it pretty impossible to read. That is a possibility, right? So I just want to ask the question, which you might be able to address because you've read all the documentation, etc. Are these descriptions in the experiment actually more complex than necessary, right? Is it possible to actually boil this down to something much simpler? This is not something where you can run a regression, but this is something where you can qualitatively discuss maybe a bit more. So finally, to conclude, I think it's a very nice, very creative paper, especially because of this combination of RCT and theory. The RCT results are novel in their own right, especially the no hand-holding result I found very interesting. And by using theory alongside an RCT, you are already able to challenge an assumption that some of the literature here has taken as given, right? Which is that positive treatment effect equals good policy. You say, well, hang on, you know, if it's a small positive treatment effect, it's only a good policy under very special conditions. And that's an interesting insight. And I would like you to challenge things even more using the same sort of line of attack. So, you know, is it really true that a positive treatment effect equals a case for government intervention? Not necessarily. And it's important to disentangle myopia from sort of costly information or rational intention stories. And I think that's key here, and that would also make a big contribution to the broader literature on households' financial mistakes. Okay, that's all I've got. I really like the paper. Everybody read it, and thanks very much again for having me.
Thanks very much, Ansgar. Excellent discussion. While people can jump in, raise their hands if you have questions, but I will let Olga to respond first.
Thank you, Ansgar, for your comments. They're very thorough and challenging. I really appreciate that from a discussion. With regards to your I think the main sort of idea was the on top of myopic consumers, or instead of myopic consumers, we might as myopic consumers, we are considering we're mistakenly considering the rational inattention consumers with rational inattention or some sort. I think it's very interesting. So I think we'll look into that. Even though in this market there is a paper, for example, by Anagol and Cole, which actually shows that consumers are myopic and sort of oblivious of the properties of the product, and take everything that all the information that are given by salesperson as given, so as truthful. But we will definitely explore this avenue, and I mean, in the model, that's even more interesting, I think, from theoretical point of view, to see what are the welfare implications of having not 2 but 3 types of consumers. We actually try to estimate the cost of information, because in the model there is this cost that sophisticated consumers bear when they opt out from the product. And we found very large amounts, so like in rupees terms, that would be equivalent to this cost. So that might be an interesting thing to, like, I think we should add it to the paper discussion of this. So towards the question about the why not enough information, or why is information so complex in the booklets? So for example, let me give you one of the examples. So some assured that is actually paid out at maturity when there is no death is always presented as a total amount, and returns in these booklets are always presented not with respect to the cost, But with respect to the sum assured, for example, you get double or you get 50% more. So it's not, you can't actually evaluate the returns per se. So you don't even see, you don't have the comparison of the benefit and cost in the brochure, which would be a very transparent way how to present the financial product. You pay this amount, you get this amount back. So, but a discussion of it is a great addition to the paper. Yeah, so heterogeneity, we are working on it. Vimal is actually in the process of working on heterogeneity analysis, and this is a gold standard now in the RCT literature and like educational intervention literature. So we are adding it to the paper. Yeah, so thank you very much. I think thank you for your positive feedback. Really appreciate that. And really enjoyed your comments, and they will definitely improve our paper. Thank you very much.